Hey there, it's Rod Yates here. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Humans of Music, a Jaxsta podcast. Each episode I talk to a music creator or industry professional about their life and career, the ups and downs of their journey, and the lessons they've learned along the way. And my special guest today is singer-songwriter Joshua Radin. So how many interviews have you listened to where an artist has said they picked up an instrument as a kid, or they started singing before they were in their teens, and they knew from that moment that they wanted a career in music? Well, that is not Joshua Radin's story. In fact, I can't really even think of another career like Joshua's. He didn't even pick up a guitar until he was 30, having spent his 20s trying to make a living as a painter and a scriptwriter. But from the moment he started strumming on a guitar, things started to happen very quickly. Within a few months, he'd written his first song, which was called Winter, and not long after, it was used in a key scene in an episode of the TV show Scrubs. And just like that, Joshua's music career was off and running. By the time he released his debut album, We Were Here, in 2006, all 10 songs had been featured in TV shows. He was signed to a multi-album deal by Columbia, and Rolling Stone even called him this generation's Bob Dylan. I told you things moved quickly. Fast forward to 2021, and Joshua has spent the past 15 years touring the world, racking up more than 1 billion streams, and he's just released his 9th album, The Ghost and the Wall. But as you're about to find out, the fact that he achieved all this after turning 30 has given him a unique perspective on success and fame. In some ways, it also created its own unique set of problems, like the sense of imposter syndrome Joshua continues to deal with as a result of starting his musical career so late in life. We talk about all this and more in the interview, but we started by talking about Joshua's new album, The Ghost and the Wall. So, let's talk about some of the themes, because you've spoken about the fact that this is a record where you were focusing on learning to love yourself and figure out what made you happy and how you could be the best version of yourself. How did that impact the music you were creating?
Well, let's start from the beginning. I was on tour promoting my last album, and I was just finishing up in Europe and just hearing murmurings about this coronavirus. And, I didn't know what to think of it. Like most people, it's like, I just thought, well, I'm sure if it's really a problem, we'll be notified at some point. And anyway, so I had just finished touring all over the world and promoting this new album. And I thought to myself, I haven't written any songs in a while. I'm going to go back home to my house in Los Angeles, and I'm just going to hole up for 3 months in my house, not see anybody, and write a new album. And then, of course, it was one of those be careful what you wish for, because I get home and it's like, oh, the world's shut down.
Right.
And at first I thought, oh, that's odd. Not that I wished for a pandemic by any means or quarantine, but it was like, it certainly made it easier right in the beginning, thinking, well, there's nothing to do anyway. I'm forced to stay home and write this album. But then obviously as time went on, it just, was horrible for me and for the world. So I spent so much time alone. I live alone in this house in Los Angeles, and I'm always used to spending time alone, but not like this. This was insane. So, I guess I would say the general theme of the album, which the reason I call the album The Ghost and the Wall, is because it's sort of a chicken or the egg question that I was trying to answer throughout the pandemic while I was by myself and working on self-care and, that sort of thing. Meaning, like, I've always been a bit alienated in my life. Never felt like I really fit in anywhere. I was always sort of like had pockets of friends that were different. And I love my family so much, but I always grew up thinking where did I come from? They're so different from me.
Right.
And the high school I went to was an all-boys high school, and it was very sports and academics focused. And I like sports and I liked academics, but I was very much more interested in the arts. And so it wasn't until university that I really started exploring more of an artistic side. I mean, I always grew up painting and things like that, but really getting into hanging out with people that were more into the arts, which is just as important as actually doing it. So, the combination, I think, is so important. Having other artists around, inspiring you and pushing you. Anyway, so The Ghost on the Wall for me means like, which came first for me in my life? Did I have walls up around myself and thus the people in my life became ghosts? Or did people in my life early on become ghosts And that's why I put up walls around myself, to not let people in and make myself vulnerable. For so long in my life, that was the case. And I had such a problem. My mom's a therapist, and she always tells me, ever since I was a little kid, she said, you have a real fear of intimacy, of letting people in, letting people get to know you. And that's true. So this songwriting for me, it came so late in life. I didn't start playing music. I learned a few chords on the guitar when I turned 30. I didn't grow up playing music at all. I was focused on visual art. And so it just became something that was like, oh, this gift that I could pick up a guitar now, learn a few chords, write a song, like a 3.5-minute song. And it was like, wow, I just expressed myself so honestly and made myself so vulnerable.
Yeah.
That I've never been able to do that in a painting or in a screenplay that I had written, or I don't know. It felt like the most honest medium I had ever found. And even though this whole songwriting process over the last 16, 17 years has been so therapeutic and cathartic for me, especially going on tour and playing in front of audiences every night, and really, like, that's my therapy. It's like amazing to get it all out. But there's always it's almost like a Sisyphean effort. I feel like constantly when I'm trying to shed these walls and let someone in, I feel like then the boulder rolls right back down the mountain, and I've got to push it back up again. And so that's what I was really focused on during this pandemic, was really looking inward and trying to figure out which came first, the ghost or the wall.
And what was the conclusion?
I'm still working on it. I wish I could tell you there was an answer, but I've started to realize that I think it just might be a question I'm going to have for the rest of my life.
Right. Okay. Did that impact the music you were creating at all?
I think so. I mean, if you listen to all the lyrics, which I know most people don't, but I'm a lyric person, you can hear that general theme running throughout most of the songs, almost all of them. And I made the album in a completely different way. So, right when the pandemic started, I thought I was just going to write this album. I didn't think about recording it, because I have a little home studio, but it's not like a professional studio. It's just like a little laptop and a mic and, just to put down ideas and things like that. It's not to make an album. And so my label, Network, once I turned in the songs that I had written, they said, yeah, we love it. We want you to make the album. And I was like, well, how am I going to do that? I can't have musicians come into my house. I mean, we're under quarantine. I'm not seeing anybody. I'm totally alone. And they said, well, let's find a producer who's got a studio who plays everything and see what we can do. And at first I thought, no way. I've never made an album like that, and that seems totally bizarre. They recommended Jonathan Wilson, and I knew of him because when he goes out and plays on the road, we share a piano player.
Okay.
This guy named Jason Borger, who I've used on my records and touring for 15 years. And he goes out and plays with Jonathan as well when he plays his stuff. So, and I had always admired Jonathan's production as well as his musicianship. So I thought, we talked on the phone for a half an hour, and I thought we talked about how we might do this, just sending each other files on email back and forth. And it ended up being amazing. It ended up being like one of those things where he and I both had never done anything like this. And I would send him notes, and he would send me back a little thing, and I would, pull up my phone and hum a little part, or I would just open my phone and I'd play the song on my guitar and sing it live and send him the recording as a voice memo. I'd send him a few song references, in terms of production, that I might like the drums to kind of sound like this, or, maybe the bass comes in here, or how about this kind of guitar picking, or, because I couldn't even record my own guitar in my house. So it was bizarre. So we just had to talk all the time and go back and forth. But the cool thing about it was, one of the reasons I've always been so intimidated in the studio, every album I've ever made, it's a good and bad thing. I've always been very fortunate that I've had these amazing session musicians coming in and playing drums or bass or piano. I mean, I usually play my own guitar and obviously do my own vocals and I write the songs. But when it comes to other instruments that I'm not proficient at, I bring in like people like Jim Keltner and Benmont Tench and, amazing musicians who I've listened to my entire life. And when you're in the studio and it's your album, it's your name, it's like, it's always been very difficult for me if they're playing something that's beautiful, but I'd like it a different way. It's always been very difficult for me to stop them and be like, well, what if it's this way? Because I'm like, well, they know better. They're geniuses. And telling the Jim Keltner how to play drums on you're like, no, it's too intimidating. He's amazing. So this was incredible, actually, to just listen back to anything Jonathan had put down whenever I wanted, just be sitting in the backyard and the sun's shining and put down my book I was reading and listen and be like, oh, and then write back and maybe in a little bit after I thought about it. There was no time constraint. There was not like, hey, we're going to lose the drummer in 3 days. We got to get all the tracks done. Like all these things that have always caused me so much stress when making an album like the way you normally do in the studio. Now, obviously, I missed out on like a live feel and a band being in the studio and saying like, let's play it live and, getting that feel. So it had pros and cons, but there were plenty of pros,
Could you see yourself doing it this way again, even if you didn't have to?
I have to be honest with you. I'm not sure. Of course, I say this after my last 3 or 4 albums. I'm like, do I really need to make another LP?
Really?
I mean, I love the LP. I listen to vinyls at home. I love that format. But every year it just seems like it's just such an antiquated format for listening to music. No one listens to my favorite songs are always like the album tracks.
Right.
And not the singles. And no one listens to those anymore. They just have playlists and Spotify and Pandora, all these, they make playlists and they listen to one song that they like. And back in the day when you make a full album, you could hope that everyone that want to hear like those 1 or 2 songs that they heard on the radio or somewhere in a TV show or movie or commercial or something like that they might buy the album and be forced to listen to the album tracks, which weren't songs that would hit you right away, but upon maybe a 5th or 6th listen would turn into your favorite song on the album.
Sure.
And people don't have that patience anymore. I feel like this album, because I wasn't able to tour, the label said, why don't we just release a new song from the album starting January 1st every 5 or 6 weeks? And that way, everyone who listens to you, when a new song comes out, they only have to listen to one song. It doesn't have to be a single, quote unquote, It can be an album track, but they're listening to it because it's a new song of yours and they're not being inundated with 12 new songs, which, for people our age, it's fine. We still have that kind of patience and know that if you listen to album tracks over and over again, they're probably going to be songs on the album that you like more than singles. But kids these days. He said as curmudgeonly as possible.
You mentioned earlier that one thing you've, I guess, thought about for your entire life is, where do I fit in? How do I, you were sort of saying you're quite different to your family in some regards. In what way?
Well, in an artistic way. I mean, no one in my family is creative or artistic at all.
Your mum was a therapist?
Yeah, she's a social worker.
And your dad?
My dad is a salesman.
Okay.
And my sister just works in a regular job in finance.
But was there, because I think your mum actually took you to your first concert. Was it New Edition when you were 6? So
wow, you've done your research. I tell you, man, it is such a pleasure to do interviews with journalists from overseas. Journalists in America are the worst. They're literally I did one earlier today, and I'm not going to say anyone's name or what the publication was, but she just was so boring, did no research, was basically just reading off her phone like some Wikipedia. So you have a new album. Tell me about it. And it's like, how about maybe ask a question? I'm here to answer any question you have, but what happened to journalism? I don't know. I was the editor of my high school newspaper, so I appreciate good journalism.
Right.
Anyway, my mom did take me to my first ever concert when I was 6 years old. At a venue called the Front Row in Cleveland, Ohio, where I grew up. It was one of those rotating stages and it would rotate in a circle.
Yep.
That's why it was called the Front Row, because it felt like it was like everyone had a ticket in the front row.
And that was to see New Edition.
It was New Edition. Yeah, it was like a boy band.
Right.
I was like 6 years old, and I remember I listened to that. I had the vinyl, and I listened to it in my bedroom. It was like those kids like ended up becoming like Belle Biv DeVoe and Whitney Houston's husband, Bobby Brown, was in that,
Yeah.
Anyway, I was 6 years old, so don't fault me. I also was a huge Beatle maniac at 6 years old. So it was an interesting juxtaposition in my listening.
Right. But so there was who was informing that listening? Because even though your parents weren't artistic, there was clearly music in your orbit. Where was that coming from?
Yeah, my parents had a great record collection. They're children of the 60s. So there was always like great stuff like Beatles and Paul Simon and Neil Young and Dylan and James Taylor and Cat Stevens and a lot of like singer-songwriters, Carole King, Joni Mitchell, Jim Croce. Like that was my dad's world. My mom listened to a lot of oldies station. When I say oldies, that was like 50s music and 60s music. When we get in the car, that would be the radio station that was on. And she was, so I got a healthy dose of like the 60s and 70s singer-songwriter, but also a lot of that 50s and 60s, like sort of Motown Stax records, a lot of Wilson Pickett and Sam Cooke and Aretha Franklin. And I guess every songwriter, every artist in any medium is sort of a sponge, and or really just like a sponge and a filter. You know, whatever you listen to, it gets jogged into your brain, and eventually you're your own filter, you're your own unique filter, and you filter it out in your own unique way. So I feel like my songs have been filtered out as an amalgam of all those types of music that I grew up on and still listen to, and it's still my favorite music. I barely listen to anything modern.
Was there, because sometimes when kids hear music, quite often you talk to artists and they're like, you know, I had to pick up a guitar. I heard this and I had to pick up a guitar, or I had to sing.
Well, I was too intimidated.
Were you? Okay. By what?
I just always thought, oh, I'd love to sing in the shower. And it was like, I could never do that. I could never get up on stage. I never wanted to be in the spotlight. I always wanted to do creative things that were behind the scenes, like painting and screenwriting, being alone in a room. And songwriting became that for me, because it was like a journal, keeping a diary just sitting on a couch with an acoustic guitar by myself. It wasn't until I signed a record deal a year later, after writing my first song and learning my first chords on the guitar, that I was thrown into the mix, and they were like, well, you're on Columbia now. So you got to go out and tour. And I was like, I have to play in front of people? Oh, I better. And so that took about a year or two, playing in different towns every night to get stage legs and be comfortable, because I was just horrified.
Well, I do want to talk to you about that and your transition into playing live, but just a little bit more on your school years, because you mentioned it was a very sporty town, and I know that you, as you've said several times, you were very much into art, and I think even 8 or 9-year-old, you studied art at the Cleveland Museum of Art. So this was very important to you. What was happening in your peer group? The fact that everyone else was so sporty, did you have much of a peer group?
All my best friends were athletes.
Okay.
They were all completely different. None of them were artistic, really.
So you struggled to fit in?
Very much so, yeah. So I really came into my own, I would say, at university. And then I decided to major, to study painting and drawing. And I was around artists. And, just being around like-minded people was really eye-opening for me. So who knows what would have happened had I gone to like some sort of school growing up that was more about the arts. But so I got a late start. I'm a late bloomer, which is, one of the songs on the album, which is my favorite of this, is called Fewer Ghosts.
Yes.
And it's all about being a late bloomer, which I am. I still don't really feel like I fit in, because I'm in between two worlds. I really feel like I grew up as this just normal Midwestern kid in America, like in a suburb, not feeling like he fit in. And then when I became a musician, I'm around musicians all the time, but those are kids that grew up their entire lives playing music. And so they have a language that I don't understand, that I don't read music. They can sit around and just jam, on any instrument. And, then I feel alienated from them. So I've never been in a band. I've always been a solo artist, where I hire musicians to play with me on the road or in a studio to make an album. But, I'm a solo guy.
There must be an imposter syndrome struggle there. Is that the case?
For sure. Whenever I watch documentaries about musicians or artists, it seems like everyone's got that. No matter what kind of artist you are, a novelist, a poet, a musician, a sculptor, whatever, a dancer, it's just everyone seems to always have that imposter syndrome. So it makes you feel a little more okay about it. And I try to remind myself that everyone's going through something like that.
Do you think that's part of what drives artists to become great? That need to always prove themselves?
For sure. I used to think that I would never be a good artist in any capacity, because my parents are great.
What do you mean?
Well, you just grow up with so many stories of these brilliant genius artists who, lost their parents or were orphans, or their father was abusive, all these horror stories. And that's why, they needed the applause. They were always seeking attention. And I don't know, I never needed that.
Yeah.
So I just thought I'll never be a great artist,
I've spoken to artists who have had similar upbringings to you, and they've got to a point in their career where they've had that revelation you just had, and they thought, I need to create some drama. I need to do something. I need to get a drug habit.
Subconsciously in my relationships with women.
So what did art give you when you were growing up? Why did it give you something when you felt like you didn't fit in? Was it a safe place for you?
Very much. It's very meditative. Same way picking up the guitar became meditative for me, and just finger picking and sitting on the couch by myself and just learning chords and practicing over and over again with a finger pattern, or just extremely meditative. And I've never meditated in my life. People in LA always ask me, "Or do you meditate? Do you meditate?" People do yoga and they meditate. It's that kind of city. But I lived in New York for 10 years, and I guess I'm more of a no. I like to sit in cafes and read novels. But I don't know, as pretentious as that sounds, I apologize. But out here, if someone asks you if you read, I think what they're really meaning is like, which self-help book have you read last? And I'm always like, I don't know. I'm reading Anais Nin right now. It's not, like I prefer, novelists, and listening to music and reading authors and watching films that change things. You can see how things changed because of these artists. Like, I don't know. I don't sit around and read just for pleasure. I read because it's educational. Like,
Okay.
I feel like I learn and I highlight things, and it helps me come up with songs I want to write. Or, I don't go to a museum just to look at a painting and be like, oh, that's nice. I stare at it for a while and let it seep in. And it always, if it's something that I need to stare at, that I feel that visceral thing, then I always usually come up with a song,
Is there one on the new album that you came up with in that regard?
No, because I didn't leave the house for this album.
That's right.
I wasn't in any museums, unfortunately.
So in terms of, before we get into music, script writing was another pursuit of yours. How does that evolve out of
failed pursuit?
A failed pursuit. But you were growing up, and you liked film, and you just started writing scripts. Is that how it worked?
I started writing scripts when I sort of gave up the dream of becoming a famous painter.
When was that?
I was living in New York, and I was, doing the whole starving artist thing for years and years, with being able to afford maybe a slice of pizza that day from coins in the couch cushions.
Really?
Yeah.
Was there, I was going to say, sometimes the glamour, in inverted commas, of being the struggling artist? It doesn't sound particularly glamorous.
It was glamorous when I was growing up thinking about it. In New York City, But after a while, turning 30, there's something about that. I've never been an age person, like a numbers person, but turning 30 and just being like, wow, I got nothing to show for this. This is, I mean, I wrote 6 full-length feature screenplays, and 2 of them I sold, but neither got made. And it was so frustrating. That's why I ended up picking up the guitar. It was not to become a musician. I just thought I would sit on the couch and learn a new chord. That was just therapeutic for me. And very quickly, that hobby that was like my meditative device, very quickly that became a career. I just fell right into it. I say this all the time. It's, it's not like I just picked up a guitar and was like, okay, and signed a record deal and boom. I was honing my skills as a writer for years, just in a different medium.
Right. And you've said that when you songwrite, you quite often think visually. And I guess that's a product of script writing, but also art.
Yeah, exactly. So everything I had done up to this point everything I had listened to, everything I had seen, everything I had painted, everything I had written, all went into this one moment of like, okay, here's my first song.
After the break, Joshua talks about how his music career started, how it exploded, and how he dealt with the sudden rush of success. Welcome back to Humans of Music and my interview with Joshua Radin. At the top of the show, I mentioned that Joshua spent his 20s pursuing painting and script writing, and that he didn't start playing guitar until he was 30. And we pick up the conversation talking about just that. So you're 30 and you've picked up the guitar, and you start to figure it out by yourself. Someone like Elliott Smith was one of your influences. Are you just trying to, at that point at least, emulate some of the artists you mentioned before and Elliott Smith?
Yeah, most definitely.
Are you trying to learn their songs? Is that your process of trying to figure the guitar out?
I learned a couple of their songs, and that helped me learn some chords. A couple Dylan songs, an Elliott Smith song, a Beatles song, a Nick Drake song, a Bob Dylan song, a Paul Simon song, stuff I was just listening to. And I was like, I would love to be able to play this song and sing this tune. And then once I had about 4 or 5 chords that I was pretty comfortable playing and a finger pattern that I was pretty comfortable with, I just decided to write my own song. My first song was called Winter.
Winter.
And yeah. And then my best friend was on a TV show called Scrubs.
Zach Braff, yeah.
Yeah, he was in my apartment in New York City, and he saw a guitar in my living room, and he said, "You play guitar?" I was like, "Not really." I said, "But I did just write my first song. I've been playing guitar for about a year. I hadn't played for anybody but my girlfriend at the time." And he said, "Well, play me the song." And I was like, "No way." I was way too shy. And so with enough coaxing, I made him turn around and not face me. And then I played him the song, and he turned around, and he had tears in his eyes, and he said, "You have to record that song and send it to Bill Lawrence, who created the show, the executive producer." He's like, he's always looking for new music to launch new artists, and, just send him a demo. All he can say is no. And so I did, like a bare bones demo that's ended up in the show.
Yeah.
Just me on acoustic guitar playing it live. And then I had one more track where I sang a harmony to it. As simple as you could possibly record a song. Bill called me about a week later and said, "I've got the perfect spot for the song. We can't find the right song for it. Can we use this?" And I said, "Are you kidding?" Of course. And then it was in the show, and I watched it, and I was like, I just can't believe this. And it turned out to be like the show's, what their super fans call like their favorite moment in the whole series. And it shut down like the website. It was on NBC back then, before it went to ABC. And it shut down the NBC website right after airing, because so many people were trying to figure out who wrote that song, where they could download it, where they could buy it, whatever. And right then and there, I just said, "This is a sign. This is what I'm going to do."
What's that like, given you've just spent your years since university trying to be a painter, trying to be a script writer, and not being able to fulfill those dreams? You've not broken through. You write your first song, and I think you've said in the past, you're almost like your audience found you.
It's bizarre, man. It's such a bizarre thing. It was overwhelming, of course, anxiety-inducing, because all of a sudden people were like, where are the songs? We need more songs." And I was like, "Oh, okay, maybe I don't know. I'm not I wrote one song. I know a few chords on the guitar," and all of a sudden I have to play live shows and go on tour and all these things. Where so many musicians I was meeting at the time were like, "Wait, what? What's the story?" And they would like be envious, and I'd always have to qualify it with, "Hey, man, I've been a starving artist for years and years. It's not like I didn't put in my dues. I just didn't put in my dues in music.
Yeah,
but in the arts I did." Anyway, I don't know.
So what happens? When's your first show?
I went to play an open mic in the West Village in New York.
And Winter is aired at this point on Scrubs?
No, not yet. Just about to.
Okay.
Like it had been picked up, I think, but it hadn't aired yet. I went to play this open mic, and the guy running the open mic said, I still have the card in my wallet. He wrote on the back of it that it was called the Bag It Inn. And he wrote on the back, "You need to bring 15 to 20 people to listen to you." So I had to call like every friend and be like, "Will you come listen?" And I only knew Winter, and I got to play two other songs. So I played "Don't Think Twice, It's All Right" by Dylan, which was the first song I ever learned on the guitar.
Okay.
And I played this song called "Fly" by Nick Drake. And then he invited me back to have like a half-hour slot. Then I started playing a little in different bars around New York City just to get, my legs. It just sort of like to get used to stuff, like.
Yeah.
To playing in front of an audience. At the time, I couldn't stand up and play because I learned to play on the couch just in my living room with my eyes closed. And so I would just put a chair on stage and sit there, and my palms would be so sweaty. I wasn't able to talk to the audience in between songs. My eyes were closed the whole time. I couldn't stand up. It was not a good show at all. Anyway, you learn by trial by fire.
That's right. But particularly at that age, if you were doing that at 17 or 18, you've got that fire of youth. When you're 30, 31, there must be a lot of self-doubt going, am I actually going to get good at this?
So much self-doubt, and still have it. Still always feel like I'm behind the eight ball, or behind, like any musician I'm on tour with, I always feel like I'm behind, like I have so much more to learn. And I mean, you always feel that way, I think, in anything. But yeah, I like you said before, the imposter syndrome is very much a real thing.
Yeah. So you moved from New York to LA. Was that to pursue music?
Yeah. I found a little singer-songwriter haunt in Hollywood called the Hotel Cafe, and it was just starting out. It's just a tiny little cafe, held maybe like 70 people. They would sit on the floor, cross-legged, and it's super intimate and lovely. And they embraced me right off the bat. And I just started playing there all the time and learning.
And this is at a time as well when Sarah Bareilles is starting there and Ingrid Michaelson. Is that correct?
Yep. Yeah. A lot of great musicians that I made friends with and talked about music with and went on tour with and drank with and
what did you learn?
Romances with, all the stuff that when you idealized Laurel Canyon in the 60s and 70s and all those stories you read about and you see documentaries about, and then you're like, all the new community of this, all these singer-songwriters in the alleyway talking. It was like Tin Pan Alley, just people talking about stories, telling stories and learning from each other. And so it was a magical time. At that time, in commercial music, singer-songwriter music was so popular too. It was before the DJ thing happened.
Yeah. I guess one of the things that's really important about that time is that you'd found your community after years of feeling like you've not fit in. Here are your...
But don't get me wrong, I still felt that I didn't fit in because these people had been playing music their whole lives, and I was just like, I'm just going to hang around and listen to you guys talk. Hopefully I'll pick up a few things and watch them play every night and try to learn and try to steal a little something from each person that I loved, the way they perform or something they said to the audience or, things like that. So I'm just a product of everyone I've seen and heard and listened to and hung out with, slept with, and, whatever.
I think that's true of most people. But so it might be hard to quantify a particular lesson, but was there a lesson that you learned, any lessons you learned from that period, from talking to those other artists and watching them play?
I learned the most valuable lesson actually is, I put it as one lyric in that song, Fewer Ghosts, on this album. It's everyone's on their own time. And I had to remind myself of that all the time, that people have peaks and valleys in their lives, personally and professionally. And also there's room for all of us. I mean, I was the first person out of the hotel cafe community to sign a major record deal, which was odd because all of them were like, what? You've been playing music for a year and you just signed like the biggest record deal Columbia's signed to a new artist in a decade. Yeah. And I was like, and so everyone just sort of hated me and loved me at the same time. They were my friends, but they were also like, you could tell behind the scenes, they were like kind of wishing for me to like have my comeuppance or something. It was just like, they thought it was just too easy right off the bat. I'm like the most humble person ever. It wasn't, I understand. It's like, who wants to see that happen to someone? The jealousy is real. So I had to constantly be even more self-deprecating all the time,
So, because I think by the time Columbia signed you, you'd already released We Were Here. You'd done that independently, your first record.
I made that. That was just a demo record of bedroom songs. And I had no idea what I was doing. So when there was a record label bidding war, and I was like, well, you can't touch the album. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just like, yeah, well, this is the album I make. You got to put it out just like this. And they were like, okay. And now looking back, I'm like, I probably should have listened to more people who knew what they were talking about. But I was just like, well, I didn't really care so much.
Yeah. Sorry, you've just reminded me something about playing at the Hotel Cafe. From what I understand, is that like music supervisors would just come and watch shows?
Yeah.
And they would come up to you after you'd played a song for the first time and say, we love this song. I work on Grey's Anatomy. Can we use it in the show?
That would happen every week I played there.
That's crazy. I presume that doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah, I would be like, I'm going to test out a new song that I just wrote. And invariably some music supervisor would be like, hey, we want to put that on One Tree Hill or Grey's Anatomy or, House or any of these shows that end up using all my music. And I'd be like, okay, sure. And I'd go out to the car. I'd always bring like a burned CD, of me singing it into my computer or something. And I'd just hand it to them and be like, and the next week they would be in the show.
That sounds so easy.
It was a different time, man. It was also a time when I call it like the licensing boom. It was before streaming. So if they wanted, a song like a Paul Simon song in one of their TV shows or a commercial or a movie or something, it could cost them $1 million. And with me, it would cost so much less. So they would just look for other artists that kind of sounded similar to someone that they couldn't afford.
Yeah.
But then once streaming happened, the whole music business got shook up, and all the publishing companies that owned the Paul Simon songs, whatever, were like, we're going to drop our prices because no one's buying albums anymore. Like that, they realized that's how people are finding out about music. So then all of a sudden, artists like myself were starting to get fewer and fewer syncs, as we call them, licenses.
Right.
But I had a good 10 years where I think I was like the most licensed artist on television It was really, really fortuitous.
So you're presumably making quite a good living by the time not long after you move out to LA. Was that the case? These
Right
shows?
away. Yeah, right away. It was amazing.
Yeah. Was there any downside to
I
being
could
known
eat
as
anything I want. I could go into any restaurant and order anything on the menu, which is my definition of success.
Was there any downside to this at all? Because you released your first album and the 10 songs on it had already been featured in TV shows.
Yeah, so it went to #1 on iTunes because people had been clamoring, like, where can we get these songs? But they weren't out. So finally I was like, all right, here they are.
And you tour, but does that give people a certain expectation of who you're going to be and what you're going to be?
Sure, but I didn't really have any thought except for I'm just going to stand on stage with my acoustic guitar and play these songs that they want to hear.
Yeah.
I didn't have a persona, that was anything. It wasn't like I was David Bowie and now I'm Ziggy Stardust on stage or, something like that. I didn't have to like get into costume or put on makeup or anything like that. I'd walk on stage in a jeans and t-shirt, whatever I was wearing that day, walking around that town and plug in and be like, okay. And I would just like, here are the songs.
And when did you feel comfortable doing that?
It probably took about a year.
Okay.
Until I was able to really tell stories in between the songs and really engage with the audience and be more of an entertainer rather than putting on more of a show.
One of the interesting things I think about that deal you got with Columbia is that I think when you went to make Simple Times, your second record, they asked you to be a little bit poppier or to have a poppier song on there. And you sort of said, well, I'm not going to do that and I'm going to buy
They wanted a radio single.
Right. And you just said...
As any major label does.
Sure. But whereas a lot of artists would do that and try and write that song, you just bought your contract out and went and released the album that you wanted to make on an independent label.
Yeah, I hadn't really spent any of the money they gave me, so I just gave it all back.
But that's incredible. That's such a ballsy move.
Yeah, I lost a lot of sleep over it.
Did you?
Yeah, but I tell younger artists when they ask me things on tour or, any advice, I tell them that story and I'm like, nothing matters as long as you can get a good night's sleep.
Right.
And everyone's got their own line of, some people's lines here, some people's lines there. If you sleep well at night, there's no substitute for that. You don't give you millions and millions of dollars. If you're not sleeping well, it ain't worth it.
Do you think that attitude comes from your background in art? The very pure pursuit of art?
I have no idea. Maybe I would think that particular view comes from just good parenting.
Okay. What did your parents make of you all of a sudden having the success as a musician?
They always like just looked at me like a black sheep, but not in a bad way. They were just always sort of amazed. I think they were a little bit worried as I was, turning 30 and I was still so broke and that I hadn't really found any success yet. But when the music thing started, they couldn't be more proud, they pop up in shows all over the place and just... One of my songs is called No Envy, No Fear. That's on Simple Times. And my dad's sign off on his email, when you have like a tag, it says your name and your address or whatever. It says, have no envy, have no fear.
Really?
Yeah. He's always telling people, he was a salesman. He's always handing out CDs of mine to people. It's amazing. All over the world, people come up to me and be like, I met your dad and he gave me a CD of yours. And that's why I'm here. I loved it. And I wanted to come see you play.
That's very cool. So is there also that thing we were just talking about then, that the only important thing is being able to sleep and your decision to buy yourself out of that contract? Does age factor into it as well? Is there a benefit to having gone through this in your 30s as opposed to...
I'm sure, yeah. Had I gone through this at 17, who knows? Maybe I would have just kowtowed to the label and said, all right, here's your single. But being broke at 30 and realizing I'm still happy, Like I realized how to be happy without money. So money's like gravy. Like I'm not allergic to money.
Yeah.
But I don't make any major decisions, especially creatively, based on money.
Okay.
Because I know it doesn't bring you happiness. I was already happy without it.
Sure. What do you think of the other benefits of starting this career at 30, of coming to music and success at the age that you did?
Well, I think that's the main benefit, is that business people are not easily able to make you make decisions based on their agenda.
What about when there are things that you can't control, like critics calling you the new Bob Dylan or the new Simon and Garfunkel? How do you respond?
It's just
to
like
that?
it was daunting. It's like having a huge bullseye on your head, especially when you're not even close. But who knows? If I'd been like 16 when that happened, I'm sure it would have gone to my head. But at 30, 31, it was like, okay, they're just trying to sell a headline, or they're just, I get it. You understand the game.
Sure. I know one of the organizations you're involved with is Little Kids Rock. And is your involvement with that, does that come from, a place of this love of art and of seeing and knowing that your experiences growing up and wanting to pursue art, and now seeing an opportunity where you can actually go back and help kids who want to pursue?
Yeah, I've been a teacher many times in my life, taught kids different things, art, history, film. I love teaching kids. I was a camp counselor growing up. So Little Kids Rock is an amazing organization because we go into like inner cities in America only. But where arts programs have been cut, they don't have the funding. And, buy them guitars and instruments and go in and play songs with them. And I've brought them up on stage and to play a song with me during the concerts. And it's always so much fun. And you bring them on the tour bus and they're so wide-eyed and like just showing any kid, in an impoverished area that you can do something, to have hope, like that you don't have to do whatever someone in your school is telling you. Here's someone that's coming in and saying like, I didn't start doing this till I was 30 and I'm having some success. So just trying to be an inspiration for people is, I realize, especially the older I get, my life it's just about traveling around the world and trying to make people feel, trying to bring some joy. And I'm not changing the world. I'm not curing cancer. I don't take myself very seriously. When things go wrong on stage, you kind of have to laugh about it. It's like, I'm getting to do something I love to do. And I always feel like I'm the luckiest person ever. And I'll do it until people don't want to come to the shows anymore.
Which is a great place to be.
Yeah.
Joshua, just before we finish up, Jaxsta is all about giving credit where credit is due. Are there people you'd give credit to for helping you get where you are today?
For sure. Obviously, my family. Zach Braff, Bill Lawrence, Ellen DeGeneres was a huge champion of my music and was so supportive. Andrea Von Forrester and Alex Patsavas were the music supervisors for Grey's Anatomy, who used so many of my songs. And my manager, obviously, Debbie Wilson, she's been with me since the very beginning, and she's incredible.
Right. Just on Zach, I meant to ask you earlier when you were talking about the fact that you played in winter in your apartment. How did you two come to be friends?
We went to Northwestern University. We had a mutual friend. And then right after graduating, we were in New York City and we ran into each other. And I was dating this girl and he knew her because they were both film majors in college. So we were sitting out at a cafe and we started talking about this Woody Allen film and realized quickly that Annie Hall was both our favorite films. And we just started quoting back and forth to each other. And it was like in that movie, Step Brothers, we were like, did we just become best friends? And he was waiting tables and I was doing little jobs to try to pay the bills while I was writing screenplays. And we started giving each other notes on our screenplays. I started giving him notes on what became Garden State. It was called Large's Ark at that point, before he had sold it or anything like that, before he had gotten Scrubs, his big break. And yeah, so by the time I started writing music, it was like Scrubs was in its third season. And he just was so supportive. He was like, I love this song. You should keep doing this. You should keep going. And maybe Scrubs will use another song. You never know. And they did. They used a bunch. And so anyway, he was super. He would bring me. I was always his plus one things because we were best friends. And it was like he was becoming famous. And he was like, he didn't have a girlfriend. So he'd always call my girlfriend and be like, can Josh come with me to this party? Or, and she'd always have to let me go. And I'd always come home a bit drunk and be like, you're never going to believe who we were hanging out with.
So on the one hand, you're obviously very happy for your friend, but was there a part of you which was slightly envious? I'm writing scripts too. And
you know what? I didn't have that feeling. Well, he wasn't writing, he was writing scripts, but he was on Scrubs for a few years before he ever got to make Garden State. And I've never been envious of him or really anyone, unless they're doing exactly what I was doing. He wasn't trying to be just a screenwriter. He's a writer, director, actor. He was trying to do it all at once, which he very successfully did with Garden State. And we were writing different kind of movies too. And anyway, I was, maybe we got along so well because I was just someone who was always just so supportive of him, as well. Some people in his life might have, been jealous and maybe that strained the friendship or something. I was always like, this is amazing. I can't believe how, this is happening. And I was just so happy for him.
That's great. Have you had a chance to meet Jonathan Wilson yet in person?
Not yet.
That's so wild.
I've been out of town or he's been out of town and I'm about to go out of town I'm going to Europe for a month and a half. And at some point we'll be in the same place at the same time.
Nice. All right, Joshua, thank you so much for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Rod.
And that's it for another episode of Humans of Music. A big thanks to Joshua for his time, and thank you for listening. This episode was mixed by Lachlan Mitchell from Parliament Studios in Annandale, and the incidental music and theme song were written and performed by Sam Lockwood. Please remember to subscribe to the Humans of Music podcast so you never miss an episode, or even better, share it amongst your friends and rate and review it. And remember, next time you need to know who wrote a song, who produced a song, who engineered it, who played on it, who sang on it, who did anything on it, head to Jaxsta.com for all your official music credit information. Until the next episode of Humans of Music, I'm Rod Yates. Thanks for listening.